for our next panel, which is the community risks of fossil fuel and plastics projects and ways to empower impacted communities through policy.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. Welcome. My name is Aarthi Ananthanarayan, and I'm our Director of Climate and Plastics Initiative at Ocean Conservancy. I'll be your moderator for today. I'm joined here by a distinguished panel of panelists that I am so excited to have to talk about this issue. First, Senator Sheldon Whitehous, who's in his third term as a senator representing the state of Rhode Island, an ocean state. He serves on the Environment and Public Works Committee and founded the bipartisan Senate Oceans Caucus. He's also the former Attorney General of Rhode Island, so he brings his legal expertise to the challenges of addressing climate change, plastics, and protecting ocean health. Next, we have Ms. Jackie Patterson, the founder and executive director of the Chisholm Legacy Project. Prior to the launch of the Chisholm Legacy Project, Ms. Patterson served as the senior director of the NAACP Environment and Climate Justice Program for over a decade. She's truly a leader in this space, and she developed programs that served state and local leadership whose constituencies consisted of hundreds of frontline communities working on environmental justice. And third, I have Ms. Shamyra Lavigne, an environmental justice advocate with Rise St. James, which is a faith-based, Black-led community organization working to stop the construction of a massive plastics complex in her community. And so far, they've been successful in stopping a project that would be one of the biggest greenhouse gas emitters in the U.S. If you'll humor me, I'll just take a few minutes to set up the discussion. We know that climate risk is already very real for communities, for coastal communities around the world, and that it disproportionately impacts the most vulnerable communities and is having ripple effects through our economy. It's clear that climate risk is community risk. But I want to look at the opposite today, that community risk is climate risk. Right now, policy decision makers and investors are beginning to push to integrate climate risk into their decision making. They're asking for more information about how climate change impacts businesses, policies, and the economy. But they're often missing a critical component of that risk, which is how climate change and corporate activities are impacting communities. And unless we see community risk as climate risk, we're reducing our ability to mitigate climate change and to adapt to it. So I want to talk today about the policies and how can we integrate that community risk into our climate policies. We've been hearing amazing stories all week about how frontline fights have been achieving something that is really hard to achieve politically, stopping the growth of the fossil fuel industry, shutting down coal power plants, stopping the petrochemicals industry, which we know is an arm of the fossil fuel industry. And that's a huge step in our work towards climate mitigation. And we've also heard about fights from indigenous community leaders who are doing the work of protecting some of the most critical ecosystems like forests that are important for climate regulation and an important part of our adaptation strategy. So we need to think about how reducing risk for communities helps us achieve both our mitigation and adaptation goals, because otherwise we're slowing down our progress in addressing the climate crisis. So I guess as we, to start us off, Senator Whitehous, I'd love to just hear a little bit more. You've been a champion of coastal communities for a long time, and we know they're disproportionately affected by climate change. Can you tell us a little bit more about the way that the most vulnerable communities that you work for are being impacted by this crisis?
Well, we're coming at it in a lot of different ways, but one of the most obvious ones is sea level rise is starting to intrude into what used to be the land and homes and businesses of coastal communities, and that's going to really force a very significant transformation in our coasts. Freddie Mac is the biggest mortgage company in the United States, probably the biggest one in the world. They warn about a coastal property values collapse, as we're seeing in Louisiana already. Sea level rise and subsidence move the ocean back, and now somebody trying to give somebody a mortgage or to provide insurance is looking at that risk and saying, no mortgage, no insurance. And with that, the value of the property crashes. We're also seeing plastic waste as a significant burden on coastal communities. very often directly related to the income level of the community. A wealthy coastal community is not going to put up with having a lot of plastic along its shores for very long. Poor communities, particularly in poor countries, have to face burdens of plastic feet deep along the coast. And of course that impedes tourism, it interferes with fishing, it disrupts the coastal economy and the way of life. And whether you're rich or poor, you like looking at a beautiful coastline and you don't want to see that waste there. That's unanimous across humanity. So those are two of the areas where we have been doing a lot of work. In the U.S., to have a coastal fund to protect coasts in the same way that the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is a big deal, protects freshwater and upland. We want to have a similar fund for oceans and coasts. It exists. We need to get lots more money into it, and we're working on that. And then working in a bipartisan way to get significant ocean plastics legislation passed and then expanded, and to get additional funding into particularly USAID, which is very good at going to local communities around the world and supporting local projects that help clean up plastic waste, turn it into a marketable commodity, support better waste management and control so that it's not blowing into the ocean any longer. And we're trying to double that number in the USAID budget.
Wow, that's so impressive. And I've heard they've recently started connecting their plastics work to their climate work,
yes,
which we know is so important.
Yes. And by the way, just a quick word, Ocean Conservancy has done great work in this space using, artisanal crafts to build weirs in rivers in Vietnam so that the plastic gets collected and then can be drawn out and then find a marketable use for it. And it's inspiring to see, and that's what USAID is also trying to emulate.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I want to talk, since you brought up plastics, we have Shamyra here, who's a representative from a coastal community where plastic production is having real effects at the beginning of that supply chain. And I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about the story of climate risk, right? Why is this fight that you guys are engaged with Formosa Plastics such a big climate story and a human rights story?
That's a great question. This story is important because the people who look like me, or the ones that are being sacrificed for this item, if you want to call it, that is already phasing out, and we won't have a need to have so much plastic in the future. Yet we are allowing these industries to be built next to an elementary school where the kids are going to school and being exposed to these chemicals. When there are other alternatives to this plastic, we can do something different. We don't have to depend on plastics, especially not at the expense of Black lives, poor Black lives. This fight is so important because we need to look after ourselves and our own communities, because if the children don't have anywhere to live, then what is the point of it all? Our kids need to be able to play safely, and in St. James, the chemical plants are allowed to build next to a school, a mile away from a school, and the politicians and the governmental leaders don't care. They auction off the land next to these schools to the highest bidder. They continually show us that they care more about the money than they care about our lives for something that is only polluting the world and making it worse. Plastic is not needed for us to live, but clean air and clean water is. So our fight is important for the sake of all the lives that the politicians don't care about or the wealthy people don't care about.
That is such a great way to articulate that. Jackie, you've been working on environmental justice issues for a long time. How do we ensure that communities have the clean air and the clean water that they need to live? I'm wondering if you can, give us kind of a high-level overview. What are some of the policies that are the most important for us to integrate this community piece into our climate policies? How can we think about that when we're thinking about accountability, when we're thinking about transparency, setting our climate goals?
Yeah, thank you. So there's a number. Some are strengthening existing policies, like the Toxic Substances Control Act, for example, monitoring and enforcing, ensuring that we actually have these toxic products. Like when we talk about the BP oil drilling disaster, for example, Corexit that was used to clean up the oil is banned in 90 countries, and yet in the United States, it's not. It's not banned. It's not even considered to be hazardous in any way. And so when the waste from the oil drilling disaster went into landfills, it went into landfills that were cited for just regular household waste, like paper towel rolls and napkins, and yet it's a toxic substance is banned in 90 countries. And so that we did start there. Secondly, we need to strengthen our zoning laws. So as was stated, the fact that you have where people can have an oil refinery right next to a school or a home in places, that's a problem. So we need to strengthen that existing law. Then we need to also strengthen our wetlands protection laws in places like Gulfport, Mississippi, where they're fighting for a development that's happening on just acres and acres of wetlands that would protect a community that is often flooded, that's going to actually be flooded even more because of the wetlands being built over by these developers. And so we need to overall also get money out of politics. We need to advance campaign finance reform because, unfortunately, there's too much of the influence of whether it's the fossil fuel industry, the plastics industries, and others, and that's why some of these policies are weak in some places because some of the folks are too beholden to those moneyed interests. So those are a few examples that I would give. And then finally, in terms of process, we have policies like the Portland Clean Energy Fund, the Future Energy Jobs Act, where there has been representational governance in developing the policies. So that is also critical as well, making sure that the people are at the table in developing policies. I was really impressed in Rhode Island. I think it was one of the public utilities commissioners who is putting forth progressive policies around not having shutoffs for electricity, for example, and it's because it's a person who's is an example of representational governance. And so that's the kind of policy making we need to be engaging around. Thank you.
Love that, representational governance. I don't know if anybody was here for the last panel on community consent, but such fascinating stuff going on around the world on how that can be built into our policies. I wanted to pick up on this piece about sort of corporate accountability. You mentioned the need to get money out of politics.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that.
Senator Whitehouse.
I was so happy when Ms. Patterson said that. It's worse, actually, than just corporate money in politics. That has always been around. Two things have changed recently that have made it really bad. One is no limits, unlimited corporate money in politics. That's 10 years ago, 2010, Citizens United decision. And then the dark money problem. The unlimited money, if you're a corporation and you spend unlimited money in a political race, you don't even have to show that it's you. You don't have to show up and own it. You set up a phony front group with a name like Rhode Islanders for Peace and Puppies and Prosperity that's only designed to hide that it's you. You dump your money into the race. You smear and do all sorts of nonsense and lies because nobody's accountable for what you're saying, because you throw away that front group like toilet paper when you're done with it. And so not only is there no accountability in the sense that people follow the money, but there's not even accountability as to who's spending the money. Nobody owns the ownership of politics. So I am so glad you said that. You and I are going to get along great. God bless you for that. And where it comes home to roost always is in the environment, in pollution, and in power over people who don't have equivalent voices to push back.
That's such a huge problem that we're dealing with right now. One of the ways that you have worked to keep companies accountable around that is on the topic of financial disclosures, the disclosures that these companies are making to different regulatory agencies or to their investors on their greenhouse gas emissions, corporate financing, transition plans. Can you explain a little bit more about why that piece is important to support communities?
Sure. There are three levels of this. One is what we just mentioned, which is disclosure about what companies are doing when they fund politics. If you're going to spend $10 million in a political race, people ought to know who you are. It's really hard to be a good citizen if you're denied the knowledge of who's doing what to whom in the encounter in front of you. When it's all behind masks, citizens are disabled. So that's a very important thing. It's also very important that corporations report the environmental risks that they face. Because at the end of the day, there can be accountability. Community groups can bring litigation. Attorneys general can bring lawsuits. And those risks and liabilities are things that when companies have to report them, it brings their attention forward. And that is particularly helpful. And what I would like to see more than anything else is when corporations come to something like this group, your ticket to get in, if you're a big corporation, should be an audited corporate political footprint statement. So you have somebody who's really honest look at it and say, here's who you gave money to in campaigns, here's what you did with your dark money spending, here's what you did with lobbying, and here's what you did with the intermediary groups, the trade associations. And you can rank who's good and who's bad, but not if nobody knows. So we need to get that kind of disclosure from corporate America, because right now you got a lot of corporations who are here saying we do wonderful things on climate. We're going to be all clean by 2050. We got great supply chains. And in the meantime, they're pouring money into the people who tried to stop the IRA dead and who are opposing me on other climate legislation. Two faces doesn't work.
I love this piece on accountability. If you'll just allow me a brief interjection, one of the pieces that Ocean Conservancy recently worked on with Rise St. James is to look at a number of case studies of where community fights are actually costing companies money. So when they are starting to report on their climate risks, when they are not taking into account community consent, to the liabilities that they're going to face from increasing the pollution burdens on communities. We looked across a whole range of industries, but this is primarily in these carbon-intensive industries. You're seeing that there's actual costs that companies are now starting to face. We're seeing communities notch wins, and it's so important in this fight. So as we start to define community risk as climate risk, I'd love us to see us take that forward into financial disclosures as well as something that companies need to think about. Shamyra, I want to come back to something we had talked about a couple days ago. How is the plastics industry trying to resist the fight in your community? What are the things that they're doing to neutralize opposition, to stop protests? How is that being criminalized?
The plastic industries in my community they're trying to win over the community by donating crumbs to certain areas in the community. So they say, hey, we're going to pollute you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but here's a couple thousand so you could put a slide in the park that we're going to be polluting. Or here is some money to fund your local high school's dance team uniforms. When we started this fight, we were confronted by some local people who were getting funding from these plants, but it was just a little bit of funding saying, hey, since you started this fight, such and such has pulled out their funding for our uniforms for the dance team. And we think you're the reason. We think you're at fault for this. And so we stepped up and said, hey, to let you know that we don't have to depend on these industries, we'll pay for those uniforms. We paid for the choir robes at our local church. We paid for the uniforms at our local high school, because whenever you need it, and when you want to provide for these children or these students, sometimes you don't have the option to pick and choose who it's coming from. So they were taking this money because they needed it. But when we were able to give that money to a school or to other organizations or a local church, It was to tell them, you don't have to depend on these industries. We don't have to take the chicken feed that they're giving us when they're making millions and billions of dollars polluting us every day, our land, our water, and our air. And then they sprinkle a little bit of like uniforms or something like that into our community. Whenever Hurricane Ida came last year, we were speaking to our parish council president, and he said, well, these industries, they brought us ice after the hurricane. So I don't have any problems with them. I said, sir, really? They brought us ice after the hurricane. Thank you for the ice. People's homes are destroyed. And while these homes are destroyed and we were out of power for 2 weeks, the smell of these chemical plants was even more extreme because guess what? When our power was out, those industries were still on and they were still polluting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I don't care about some ice that they brought to us. When people's lives are being sacrificed, I don't care about the ice they brought us. But that's what these industries do. That's how they try to win some of the community members over. And they definitely have our parish council wrapped around their finger because they're doing things like bringing us ice after a hurricane. That's how they do it. They give us a little bit, they bird feed us that way to make up for the 24 hours and 7 days a week pollution and the millions of dollars that they're winning. And some people in the community agree and think that, hey, well, at least they're giving us ice.
So powerful. Thank you. And what an amazing way to intervene in that cycle. Senator Whitehous, I know we only have you for a few more minutes. I wanted to ask one last question for you. You've worked hard to combat both climate change and plastic pollution, problems that both harm our coastal communities. And until recently, we've seen a lack of action around phasing down fossil fuel production. And now we're seeing a similar problem in communities like St. James where we're to reduce plastic production. I'm curious, what are some of the policies that you'd like to see to help us deal with that growth in plastic production that's going to be driving fossil fuel use as we look forward?
Well, first, let me say thank you to Ms. Lavigne for They Bring Us Ice, because that's not just a story, that's a metaphor. And I'm going to remember that for a long time. To me, the most important thing is that they fight as hard as they possibly can to protect an enormous subsidy. The economic group, the International Monetary Fund, is not a green group. It is not an environmental group. But they do math. And they've calculated that the subsidy for fossil fuel in America every year is $660 billion. Well, how much would you spend in politics? How much ice would you drop around Congress to protect a $660 billion subsidy every single year? And that affects the market. Because if you're selling a product that's getting a $660 billion subsidy, you've got a big unfair advantage over the solar or the wind or the battery storage facility. So taking that away and making the playing field level is, to me, a really big deal. And that's where putting a price on pollution, free to pollute should not be acceptable, and then making sure that countries agree on that. So the carbon border adjustment that's coming from the European Union, we ought to see that as a big opportunity to lift all of our levels together. And then I think that gives alternatives to plastic, alternatives to fossil fuel, a fair shot, and that will be a big accelerant in getting us to the clean economy and clean environment that we're fighting for.
That's so important. 60 to 70% of the cost of making plastic is fossil fuel inputs.
Yep.
So that's, if you're wondering why we have so much cheap, ubiquitous plastic in our world.
Cheap, subsidized fossil fuel input.
That's great. I want to come back to this piece of sort of the close connection between these industries and how they're influencing communities. Jackie, I'm wondering if you'd talk a little bit more about what are some of the policies that are happening in regions around the U.S. where they're trying to create alternatives, to create a transition. How are we creating that shift?
Yeah, thank you. I would pull up a couple of examples. One would be, as I said before, the Portland Clean Energy Fund, which was really a number of groups came together, frontline communities, and said, what are the principles that we want to advance in this transition? And then they ensured that they had not only clean energy, but they also made sure that the economic opportunities were equitably distributed, and that the decision-making and the monitoring of the effectiveness of this policy were also a community-driven, community-led process. I appreciated that. Also, the Illinois Future Energy Jobs Act, I think it was called, where it was a multi-stakeholder engagement around that again. It was folks who are from clean energy, folks who are from workforce development, from groups that are returning citizens, labor. We're all there together saying, what are the ways that we can work together to have a multi-solving approach to this policy making? So those are some of the examples I would put forward. And they each engage alternatives that are equitably grounded, that are comprehensive around everything from local manufacturing to clean energy and so forth. So those are a couple of examples I would point to. There are definitely more, but
that's really inspiring, and it's great to see that work coming through.
Yeah.
I want to give you a chance, Senator Whitehouse, if you have anything, if you want this group to take away one thing.
One last word. In the Inflation Reduction Act was billions of dollars for environmental justice groups. And environmental justice groups have not been in the funding mix before. And as you know, environmental justice groups can often be small and local. Environmental justice groups are very good at communicating with one another, to get together to protest, to get together to advocate, to get together to get their message out. It's going to be really important for the environmental justice community to share with each other these opportunities to work with your congressional delegation where you can. I'm going to be working very hard with my Rhode Island environmental justice community to make sure that we're connecting these billions of dollars down to grassroots environmental justice organizations that don't have a history and a strength of dealing with grant making and getting funding from the government. So that's a very big piece of low-hanging fruit that is out there, but if you're not looking up a little and don't see it, you might miss it. So it's going to be really important to the EJ community to work together to make sure that you're taking full advantage of the funding that is out there in the billions of dollars. And it's been a real privilege to be with you all here today. And we're getting ready to clear out, so I've got to go. But thank you for your work, and thank you for having me with you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And it's so important to see that investment. Shamyra, from your perspective, from a community, what are some of the policies that you want to see from our national decision makers, from corporations, as they think about building out new projects in places like St. James?
I want them to make it illegal to kill poor black people. Can we make it illegal for these plants to pollute us? When these plants are caught polluting us, shut them down. Period. I'm fed up of the EPA or other powers that be going to these plants, finding out that they are polluting us, that the levels are too high, that it's toxic to the people living there, and you give them a slap on the wrist and tell them to pay a fine. Paying a fine to a company that is making or earning billions of dollars is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. Make them shut down. That's the policy I want to see. I don't want to hear no fines. I don't want to hear anything about that because they don't care. They pay the fines and they keep polluting. It's not enough. Shut them down. Make it illegal to pollute poor black people. I don't know why I have to say this. Our lives matter. Poor black people's lives matter. The industries don't care, but we care. Make it illegal to build on top of our ancestors' graves. I can't tell you how many of our ancestors are built underneath these chemical plants. When Formosa Plastics was trying to build 2 miles away from my childhood home, they found grave sites of our ancestors, unmarked graves. They knew those graves were there whenever they were granted the permit. We found that out when we began to investigate them. But they knew it, and they covered it up, and were planning to continue to build that industry on top of our ancestors' graves. So I can't imagine how many other industries have come in and built on top of our ancestors' graves. Make it to where you cannot build nowhere near our ancestors' graves. Because what Formosa did was they put a fence around where our ancestors are buried and said, we're going to build around that fence. That's not enough. Our ancestors worked on this land in St. James. If you don't know, St. James is a community where the slave ships would come in on the Mississippi River and were brought into St. James. St. James is a community with plantations where my ancestors worked and were buried without any type of commemoration. And since the plantations they're still there, but we went from plantations to plants. So our ancestors sacrificed on those plantations, and now we're being sacrificed by the plants that are built on top of our ancestors. But the time has come. The resistance has begun, and we won't stand for it anymore. I want to find all of our ancestors' graves in St. James, and whenever plants are built on top of them, shut them down. Because I know they knew about those graves when they were building, just like Formosa knew when LDEQ granted them that permit. They just lie about it and keep it moving. So make it illegal to build too close to our graveyards of our ancestors. Make it illegal to pollute poor black people, because clearly it's not. Clearly it's legal. And then make it illegal to build near a school, because clearly that's legal too.
I don't know what I can ask that can follow that. That is, I mean, I guess the question, and this isn't, I apologize, this wasn't one of the questions I sent you in advance, but I want to know the answer, Ms. Patterson.
The answer.
If you could wave a magic wand, and what are the protections that we need desperately right now that are not in place, that are currently, people are saying they're politically infeasible, or it's just going to be too hard or too expensive? What are some of the things that you would put in place to be able to protect communities like St. James Parish?
Yeah, well, no, I would definitely echo Ms. Lavigne. I mean, I was on a panel or doing a talk yesterday about offsets. And there was a presumption that offsets were, and it was about how to make offsets equitable. And I said it's really not possible because at the very core of it, this is the type of policy making that Ms. Lavigne is talking about is what we need. We can't. It's the notion of actually having someone pay to be able to commit murder, which is really what we're talking about. So so the last slide of my presentation was when we talk about alternatives that we need to criminalize polluting, because it's the same thing as putting a gun to someone's head if you're polluting on top of them, as Ms. Lavigne so well described. So we really need to have not just kind of, I mean, even I think even Senator Whitehous talked about, putting a price on pollution, and I don't think that that's the way that we're going to get where we need to get, which is to really just end it. So we need to have regulations and not just penalties where you pay, but actually criminalizing polluting. So that's where I would go. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So.
And I want to ask one more question. I recall earlier this week you were circulating text around human rights. I'm curious, as you think about this within the UNFCCC process and connecting that human rights language to what's happening around these climate negotiations, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're working on?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, we have a resolution on race, racism, and climate reparations in the UNFCCC. Nowhere in these negotiations officially has there ever been talk about colonialism, white supremacy, racism that has formed the basis for where we are today. Ms. Lavigne talked about making it illegal to kill black folks, and that's exactly what we're talking about. We need to name the fact that it is that out of the 10 nations that were named to be most vulnerable to climate change by, I think, Notre Dame and German Watch's index, 7 of them were Afro-descendant nations, not to mention the communities within industrial industrialized nations that are most vulnerable to these impacts. So the resolution lays out the need for us to name racism, and name, when we talk about loss and damage, really actually talk about it in the context of climate reparations to those who are least responsible yet more impacted. And so we're really calling for the inclusion of this dialogue within the UNFCCC, and also calling for an official constituency group within the UNFCCC to be formed around racial justice in the context of these climate talks. So that is that's what that is. And you can, if you wanted to look at that resolution and ideally sign on to it, we're presenting it next week with the list of signatories. It's at www.thechisholmlegacyproject.org. Thank you.
Thank you. That's so helpful. And how powerful would that be to have a dialogue specifically on that?
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to leave some time if folks in the audience have some questions for our panel. Anyone want to jump in?
Thank you. Oh, I think I'm supposed to stand on the X. Thank you, guys. I mean, this was such a powerful message, and I was just wondering, we've talked so much about two key issues affecting communities, vulnerable and marginalized communities, climate change and plastic pollution. And getting the message out about both of these crises is really difficult because the connection, I think, gets lost. So I'm curious, from your points of view, how do we enter, or what's a good way? I'm sure there's multiple. What's one good way to sort of start the conversation around the connection? Do we come at it from, well, I'll let you. That's my question. How would you start this conversation to make sure people understand how closely interlinked this is to the health and the impact it has on your community?
Your question was how we can start the conversation on how the climate is impacted by the environmental. You said the plastic and the what?
Oh.
Oh, okay, yes. That's a great question. I think the way that we start this conversation is to come at it a different way than what we would naturally think to go about it. And what I mean by that is I have a lot of hope and a lot of inspiration for the children. And I think that if the children are involved and they know and they understand, then they can go home and have a conversation at the dinner table with their parents, who may be a little bit more susceptible to hear it coming from their child than they would from someone that looks like me. So if we get the kids to understand that, maybe that'll be a way we could break through to them and hear them, because us just telling our story isn't enough. They know that we are dying. They just don't care that we're dying. And also, I think that if we have the children advocating it in that way, in their own creative way, that's just a way to go through the back door to get them. And if they may listen to them a little bit better, have their kids and our young people do things together. Make them see our children as human beings. And maybe they'll begin to see us as human beings. And if they see us as human beings, maybe they'll care about our lives. Because right now, they don't see us that way. They don't see our hearts. They don't see that we care about our family. And when I see our kids go to school and go to college, they don't see that we want to have clean air and clean water. They're just seeing the profit that they're making. So the plastics and the climate change, they're interweaved. Because to create the plastics, you are destroying the climate. And the climate is impacted, which affects all of us. So if we're in the house together, and if my room is on fire, then your bedroom is next. Mine just is on fire first. But you won't be able to run from the destruction that you're causing, because we're all living in the same house. Do you want to answer that? Okay. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you. Greeting everybody, and Friday, I enjoy your discussion. So excited to be here. I want to ask a question, basically on the team, because they are talking about empowering impacted community through policy. I'm talking out of the perspective of Nigeria. For example, I met several friends here. They told me I've been in Nigeria is so nice, Abuja. I've been in Nigeria is so fantastic, so good, Lagos. But when you visit Nigeria to those impacted community, those local community, those grassroots, sometimes you regret. Sometimes you feel like I don't need to visit that area again. You get it now? Now, when government make their policy in the federal level, I call it top bottom. They will just be at the office and make policy. Put it on the local people. And we are novice about it. Whether you like it or not, they are pass it. Sometimes they just feel like call one person from that community, sign this thing, and that is all. This is crazy. Now, when you talk about community-based organization, local organization, and they want to access funding, like they are saying here, some of those funding, if you see the kind of criteria they will put in, it is so difficult that those local-based organizations cannot access. The community remain like an orphan. If you want to run to funder or an organization, you cannot access. If you want to go to government, you can't even have a dime, dollars to pay for your local community to fly to Abuja. And we become the two-way, we are visiting in this side and we are visiting in this side. For example, in Green Climate Fund, it is for a big organization. You can access. A local-based organization, no way. Just forget about it. So in this way that we are talking about empowering local policy, empowering impacted community through a local, how can this be done? How can those empowerment get to the grassroots? That's my question. How can this empowerment get to the grassroots? It gets to those local people, not in the city. You can just be here, absent to Abuja, absent to Nigeria. Who receive it at the federal level? And that is all. They can just be here, put it on paper, I've done your project, XYZ, and give you full report. Why not? How can we get to the local community? That's my question.
Okay. Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thank you so much. And it's actually one of the major questions from right now. When Senator Whitehous was talking about the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, that's one of the biggest challenges, that often, if you have Wi-Fi or if you're connected with an organization, those are the great groups that are more likely to access these resources. And so it's the same situation in the United States as it is, as you described, in Nigeria, where there are communities that, whether it's been various legislators, whether it's been Ford or Carter or Reagan or any of the presidents that we've had over the decades, that community hasn't changed at all. There's a community I work in called Sand Branch, Texas, that hasn't had running water. And it's right outside of Dallas, which is one of the richest cities in the world. And so for us, that is a major emphasis in our work, is to reach those communities that aren't even on the map in a lot of ways. They're unincorporated communities, and make sure that they know about the resources that are available, and to make sure that there's a pathway for them to access resources. But it's also a two-way street. We're also pushing the government to be accountable for reaching those communities. So it's not just up to an organization to decide that that's their mission, when there's thousands of communities that are unreached out there, that the government needs to be for the people, by the people, for the entire country, no matter where you live. And so we're really pushing all the federal agencies and federal government and state agencies and even local governments to say, what are you doing about these distant areas that are invisibilized by a system that only caters to people who have broadband? So I definitely agree with your question, and it's something that is definitely something that we're centering in the work of the Chisholm Legacy Project, and others are starting to have this recognition as well. There's other organizations that are focusing on making those pathways and making the government policy say, you can't say that you're working with disadvantaged communities when you don't even know where some of these communities are, and you don't have a relationship with those communities, and you don't have an intention and commitment to reach those communities. So thank you for that question. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and if I can just add on to that, we're seeing a lot of investors and the World Bank, actually BlackRock, starting to talk about the need for respecting the right to free, prior, and informed consent for Indigenous peoples. And I think that is a really important piece of this. It's a model that we can use to look at community consent in other places. And I hope that with the shareholder resolutions around that, with investors pushing for it, we'll also see more accountability for companies to actually implement those processes of consultation and consent for communities. Other question?
Thank you so much. I was disturbed when the senator talked about the role of money in politics, that now it's a free-for-all for those who have money, for companies with deep pockets. So basically they can influence the lawmakers. So my question is this: how can we connect communities directly with the policy-making process and not just simply leave it in the hands of corrupt senators or Congress folks who can be bought by corporations, but ensure that their voices, their needs, their aspirations are reflected in the policies and laws that come out of Congress and the different houses? Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a great question. It's actually something me and my mother were discussing recently when we were speaking with a lady from the Department of Energy this week. And that question is very important because in St. James, our politicians and our parish council members are in the pockets of industries. And they don't represent our best interests. They represent the best interests of their pockets. So what we need is an organization that can be recognized and respected by organizations like the Department of Energy that are made up of the people in the community that can directly tell you how the money needs to be spent and give you the transparency and accountability that will be respected at the same esteem or a little bit as similar as the same esteem as a parish council would be. For example, having someone from our organization, having someone from Lake Charles, Port Arthur, and whatever ones I'm not thinking about right now, having a spokesperson come from them, maybe a group of 10 people. So then when that funding comes, you can come directly to us. You don't have to go through Big Green. You don't have to go through our parish council members. Because guess what? Our parish council members aren't on our side. So we have to represent ourselves the best way that we can. And we can come together and let them know, listen, we will be the ones accountable for the funding that you can provide. We can be the ones that are accountable to sit at those tables when you're making these policies. And I'm a big advocate for anybody that is making policies that are affecting environmental justice groups or fence line communities need to come to see the community, or you cannot make a policy or have a comment or an opinion on any policies that affects their community. So many people are sitting behind a desk pushing pens, reading black and white, and they may Google us and see it on the internet, but it's not the same. You need to come and smell it. You need to come and see how close it is and the proximity it is to a elementary school. You need to come see these plants, and you need to see the dust in the air. And if you don't, then you're not qualified to make any decisions on our community or anything that affects us until you do. That needs to be mandatory. We need to have say-so in the policy making, not our council members. Because if they were the ones that needed to be in it, we wouldn't be dealing with this. They're letting us down. So I think us on the community level, creating a group that we can be accountable, that can directly represent the community itself, from the community, living in the community, have them sitting at the table to make these policies. You want to add to that?
Hi, my name is Kat, and I'm an urban planner in Michigan, and I wanted to thank you both for these, and also Senator Whitehous, who's no longer here, such amazing and very powerful stories. But I also wanted to thank you, Jackie, for bringing up zoning, a favorite of everyone's. I know, as a planner, I can say that. But I wanted to ask you, sorry. Yes, sorry. Okay, I'm over here. I wanted to ask you if you had any examples of how communities have been preparing to prevent or like companies from coming in by changing their zoning rules. How are you getting people to those incredibly boring planning commission meetings to fight? Because you're talking about bringing it up from the bottom and having communities make sure their members are heard. How are we getting people to those very boring meetings?
Yes,
Anyway,
no,
thank you.
It's very true. Yes. So one is there's groups like ECHO, I don't know if you know, in Gulfport, Mississippi, where we've worked with them and they have themselves independently pulled together community meetings and helped to kind of to prepare people for what they're going to see in these zoning meetings, and then to actually practice giving testimony, and they make it fun, because like you said, yeah. And so they know what to expect when they're going in there, and they also know that what they might be up against in terms of these paid lawyers who are going to make the space seem intimidating and make people feel less than in those settings. So that has been the most effective, really having those prep sessions, preparing people, making it fun, and getting people ready to go in and to know what they're going to be up against. And that has definitely been most effective, whether it's been the zoning boards or the public utilities commissions. We just came out with a report while here called Who Holds the Power, about the public utilities commissions helping, and the tagline is demystifying, diversifying, and democratizing the public utilities commissions, using these examples of places that have really brought the community together, prepared them to go in, and been able to enact change. So thank you. That was a very good question. Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Wright?
Well, this is not a question. This is probably more of a statement. And so the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice has been working in the Mississippi River Chemical Corridor since 1992. In fact, we trained her cousin, the Lavigne. So Shamyra is newer to this group, and we are trying to incorporate Rise St. James a little bit more in the work that we do. But we do all of that. We prepare communities. We do research. We lead the fight in the corridors. So, Shamyra, everything you're talking about that you need, we do that already, and we've been doing it since 1992. There's been a little disconnect because of Katrina, and so we worked with, it's a generational thing, so we worked with Miss West, who would maybe be 100 if she were alive now, or maybe 80-something, and now this is her cousin and our cousin's daughter. So we're looking at 3 generations in St. James Parish that we work with. But we have lawyers. We work in conjunction with Dr. Robert Bullard at his center, but we have the HBCU Climate Change Consortium. We have the HBCU CBO Gulf Water Justice, Gulf South, I forget all the acronyms, and the Gulf Water Justice Training Center. And we will be working, moving forward with our Justice 40. And we just recently received a grant from Bloomberg to actually recharge our campaign against petrochemicals. So all of this is coming, yes. So it's just beginning again in the way that we did years ago. We know how to do this. We know how to train communities, and we have 12 or 13 different training modules to get them up to speed. And we have been working in 5 states already with communities. And the Ocean Conservancy has recently joined us with our Justice 40 works. I just wanted you to know that right at home, we are also doing this work, and we're there to help.
Thank you very much. I'd like to add, I'm getting ready to send out a tweet. Took a great photo of you. The violence that the fossil fuel industry and the plastics, the violence that has wrought on some communities, black communities, particularly in the Gulf Coast. I'm going to give you 4 communities that either had to be relocated or was destroyed. Sunrise, Reveltown, Morrisonville, Norco, Mossville. These are 5 black communities, some of which were founded before the United States was the United States in terms of Louisiana being a state. These are communities that don't exist anymore because they have been destroyed. They survived slavery. You understand what I'm saying? They survived Jim Crow segregation. Do you hear what I'm saying? They destroyed the apartheid that basically leading up to not having the right to vote, all of that. They survived that, but they could not survive toxic racism. That's what we're dealing with, toxic racism. And we're talking about strong people who bought land from the plantation owner, like Norco, old diamond plantation. So what we're talking about is not just the loss of property. We're talking about the loss of community, homeland, and your history being wiped out. And the only thing that may be left is a historical marker. We must fight this, and there are initiatives that are funded to fight this. And the most recent one, as Dr. Wright said, is the Bloomberg-funded Beyond Petrochemicals, $85 million. Sounds like a lot, but it's not a lot when we talk about the long arc of justice. As Dr. King said, the arc of the universe is long, but if what bends toward justice, and we have to help it bend toward environmental and climate justice. I want to say that very excellent initiatives. We work in Gulfport, we work in Pensacola, we work in Mobile, Africa Town. Excellent movie. I mean, it's like we have to fight to preserve our legacy. And New Orleans and Houston. That's our 5-city Gulf Equity Coalition. We're on the front line of this petrochemical assault. So we have to fight. And young people, the next generation, we need you fierce. We need fierce warriors on this because this is a fight for our lives. And I think we're up to it. Intergenerational mobilization. As Dr. Wright said, 3 generations that we're talking about when it comes to St. James Parish. Shintech was a hell of a fight. But what we did, we sent them back to where? They came out of Japan. So the idea is we got to fight these foreign countries. Sayso is in Mossville. Sayso is a company that got its wealth out of apartheid in South Africa. So we're talking about something that was so evil in South Africa now is being imported into the United States. We have to fight this. This is evil, and we must fight evil. Thank you.
Just last question. If you guys had anything you want this audience to take away from today, maybe we'll go to Jackie first. What do you want people to remember?
That we need to get money out of politics, that we really, really do. Thank you.
I don't know. What do I want people to... I want people to know that we will never give up and that the resistance has begun and it's not going to end. Dr. Wright and Dr. Bullard and my mother, we're going to take this on and going to keep it going. Trust me, we got this. We're going to keep it going and we will win.
Thank you for joining us today. Feel free to come up and talk to our panelists after this.